everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lottie and this is my September and October wrap-up. I wanted to do things a little bit differently today. As you can tell, I'm not filming in front of my bookshelves. I just wanted to do something a little bit more cozy and calm and snuggly, I guess. It's been a long time since I filmed a video, you know, life just gets in the way sometimes. I actually started a new job. I'm now a library assistant, which is really exciting, but that has been taking up quite a lot of my time, so I just haven't had as much energy to dedicate to YouTube lately. And obviously I missed doing my September wrap-up, so I thought I would just combine both my September and October wrap-ups together. This might be a bit of a longer video, I hope you don't mind. Let's just get straight into it. So before I go into the books that I completed in September, I want to talk about some statistics first. So in September I read a total of 6 books. Those 6 books equaled 2,761 pages. Compare that to August, I read almost 1,000 pages more, which is really good. I'm really pleased with that. My star ratings, I rated 1 book 3 stars, 3 books 4 stars, and 2 5 stars. So I had a pretty good reading month in September. Genres, I read 3 fantasy books, 1 sci-fi book, 1 horror and 1 thriller, so I had a mixed bag in terms of that. In September it was of course the Bookoplathon and the Magical Readathon, so I will be talking about which books fulfilled the prompts for those readathons that I was participating in. I did complete both of the readathons with the TBRs that I set for them. I think I mentioned for my Magical Readathon TBR I only had to read 2 books because that was the rule for completing the readathon, even though I had set a TBR of 7 books, but obviously I didn't read 7 books in a month, so I didn't get to all of those books. So I'm hoping that in November and December I will be able to just catch up on the books that I missed out for Magical Readathon. So the first book I read in September was A Dance with Dragons Part 1 by George R.R. Martin. This is the 5th book in the Song of Ice and Fire series, or if you have the split editions like I do, this is the 6th book. This I rated 4 stars and it fulfilled the chance card prompt for Bookoplathon and also the read a book with a map prompt for Magical Readathon. I have been reading this series for years now. It is so long and I'm sure you all know what this is about. This is obviously the source material that Game of Thrones is based on, and by this point in the series we are up to sort of season 4, season 5 I think. This book takes place at the same time as the 4th book, A Feast for Crows, and so the characters are all sort of off doing different things. It's been ages since I read this now, so I'm starting to forget. I did originally DNF this book when I first started reading it years and years ago. It just wasn't the right time for me, I just couldn't focus on it, so I thought I would dedicate more time to it. And I think I actually got pretty far into it from my first read through. I was about 200 pages in, so I'm glad that I was finally able to finish it. I am hoping to read the second part before the end of the year so that I can finally finish this series, because let's face it, Winds of Winter is probably never going to be released. But I did enjoy it. It's just a Game of Thrones book basically. Obviously the series ended a couple of years ago now, so I already know what was going to happen, but there were a couple of differences in this to the TV show. Yeah, I don't really have much to say about this. It was good, I enjoyed it, I'm looking forward to completing it. It's just sort of a bit of a slog at this point and I would just like to finish this series and finally cross it off my TBR. So the next book that I read in September was Rainbow Grey by Laura Ellen Anderson. This is a middle grade book and I really enjoyed it. I rated this 4 stars as well. It was just so fun and whimsical. This is the first middle grade book that I've read in quite a while, so I was a little bit apprehensive, but it was just the right thing I needed after reading A Dance with Dragons. So I used this for the read a book with supernatural elements prompt for Magical Readathon, and I was pushing that a little bit because I think everybody else sort of picked books with like haunted houses or ghosts in for that prompt, but because this has magic in it, that's why I chose this book. This follows Ray Gray, who is a weatherling, and in the world where she lives, like everybody has some kind of weather magic, but Ray doesn't have any weather magic And this is sort of just the story of her discovering her magic and where it comes from. But I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed the illustrations in it. They were really fun, and it was just a nice, refreshing way of how a story's told. I quite enjoy reading books with illustrations in, I found, and I feel like they really add to the story, especially because in this the illustrations very much felt a part of the story rather than just like pictures of what was happening in the prose. So that's why I really liked this, and I wish there were more adult novels out there that had illustrations of this sort of style where that they are part of the story itself. Yeah, but I really liked this, and as of today, the day that I'm filming this, the second book has been announced, and I'm really looking forward to that one as well. So September was the month of tomes for me, and I read my most anticipated book of the year, which was Emperor of the Vampire by Kristoff. This and all of its like 700-page glory was a bit of a slog, I'm not gonna lie. I did rate it 5 stars, but it was only just about a 5-star. So I'll get into my thoughts on that in a moment, but I use this for the prompts: read a spooky book for Bookoplathon, and then read a tempting book or a book that's at the top of your TBR for the magical readathon. So as I mentioned, the Emperor of the Vampire was my most anticipated book of the year, and did it live up to the hype? Yeah, it was exactly what I expected, which I think is why I just feel a bit meh about it in general. When I was reading this, I really loved it, but afterwards I didn't have the same sort of reaction that everybody else online seems to have for this book. It didn't leave me feeling like mind blown. I don't know, it's a Kristoff book, and that's exactly what I was anticipating, and I don't know why I was expecting to be surprised, but it's exactly what I wanted out of this, and so I'm really pleased about that. I am looking forward to reading the next one, and again, I did really love this book. I'm just not raving about it like everybody else seems to be. I don't know, it's like if you've read a Kristoff book before, like Nevernight for example. Nevernight is my favourite series of all time, and that blew my mind, and I think if I had read this book without reading Nevernight first, I might have had the same mind-blowing experience as I did with Nevernight. So as it stands, Nevernight is still number 1, but I did really like this. I've just realised I didn't even mention what it's about, but if you have spent any moment in book sphere online, you'll probably have heard of this book before, but essentially this is a high fantasy novel set in a world where the sun set like 30 odd years ago, and creatures of the night have taken over essentially, with vampires being the most prominent. And our main character Gabriel, this is just the story of his life. So he joins this sort of monastery that specifically focuses on fighting the vampires, and it's sort of told in multiple perspectives throughout his life, so it's all from his perspective, but we follow him first joining the monastery, and then also we have a perspective of him 30 years later and something that's going on with the Holy Grail. And this Holy Grail is said to be able to destroy the vampires, etc. And then also we have another perspective, which is him telling the story. So if you've read The Name of the Wind, that's sort of like where a character tells a story to another character. I've not read it myself, so I don't really know how well I can compare that, but it's sort of like Interview with a Vampire style as well, where the main character is telling his story to someone else. I don't know if we're going to be following that way of storytelling throughout this series, or if we're eventually going to get caught up with ourselves, but I quite enjoyed the jumping back and forth between the different perspectives. This book is also illustrated, which I absolutely adore. The illustrations are beautiful, and like I said with Rainbow Grey, I wish there was more adult books that were illustrated. Yeah, the illustrations in this are absolutely stunning. So I just, yeah, they really enhanced the reading experience, and it just made everything feel more immersive. But I am hoping that the rest of the books are illustrated as well, which I'm sure they will be, but I'm really excited. There was just one thing that I was really sort of not into, and this book focuses quite a lot on religion. It's a fictional religion, it's made up, but you can tell it's very heavily based on Catholicism, which the constant emphasis on all the religious stuff just really sort of put me off, and I hope it's not as prominent in the future books, because it just sort of put a bit of a sour taste in my mouth. I don't know what it was, I just wasn't that into it. 5 stars, I really enjoyed it. It's a Kristoff book, of course I was gonna love it. Okay, so the next book that I read was yet another J. Kristoff, but this one is one of his books he wrote with Amie Kaufman. It's obviously Aurora Rising. So this book I used for the prompts feed scroll for Bookoplathon and also a 5-star prediction for the Magical Readathon. And of course, I gave it 5 stars. I actually enjoyed this way more than Empire of the Vampire, which is kind of weird to say, but that's just how I feel. I absolutely love this. So this is like a space opera. I sort of compared it to Star Trek crossed with Ocean's 11 crossed with Stranger Things, which sounds like a very weird mashup, but if you read this, you will understand exactly what I'm talking about. This is set several years into the future, where we have a gang of miscreants, I suppose, called Squad 312. They've all sort of been dumped together as graduates of Aurora Academy, and they are off to do their first mission. And also we have another character, Aurora, who was sort of trapped in some kind of like wormhole, and so she's 200 years out of time, out of space. Squad 312 and Aurora sort of all end up together. Aurora discovers she's got some sort of superpowers, and basically it's just the story of this group of people trying to save the world as they also try to get along. That was a really roundabout, complicated way of explaining this book. What I really love about this book is the dynamics between all of the characters. They have such fantastic banter with each other, which is what I enjoy about Kaufman and Kristoff books. You sort of had the same sort of interactions in the Illuminae files as by them as well. So this is sort of similar to the Illuminae files, but it's very much stands as its own thing. I feel like the only similarity is that they are both set in space and they are both written by the same authors. I wasn't really sure what to expect going into this, and I was delightfully surprised. I absolutely loved this. I loved the next book, and I'm really excited for Aurora's End to come out in November. Next book that I read in September was The Hunted by Charlie Higson. This is the 6th book in the Enemy series. I used this for the prompt Who for Bookoplathon and also the thriller prompts for Magical Readathon. This is a series set in present day London where everybody over the age of 15 has gotten this disease that turns them into child-eating, zombie-like, mindless people. If you can call them people, I suppose they're more like monsters at this point. And it's just the story of all the kids under the age of 15 trying to survive in London in this apocalyptic world that they've found themselves in. Each of the books follows a different group of kids, and by this point they have all started to come together. So the way the series is told is a little bit strange. So the second book is set a year before the first book, and then the third book is set like a week before the first book, and then the fourth book is set, I think, parallel to the fourth book, something like that. They all sort of come together and then the story continues on. So by this point we are following 2 different perspectives, primarily because one of the characters goes off somewhere, and then we're following the rest of the characters that are still in London, and the story sort of meshes together at one point. It's really hard to talk about this book, obviously, because it's such a late book in the series. But what I like about this series is seeing all the different kids and how they work together or not work together and just survive in London in this world where there are no grown-ups and they have to fend for themselves. This series is brutal, it's really gory, and I often get really surprised that it's actually like a young adult series because it is so graphic, but it's really good and I really enjoy it, and I am looking forward to seeing how everything will come together for the end, which is the last book. But yeah, I rated this 4 stars if I didn't mention it already. It was a really good, strong contender in the series, so I'm hoping that the end doesn't let me down. And the final book that I read in September was a little bit of a disappointment because I rated it 3 stars, and it was Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption by Stephen King. So I used this for the standalone prompts for Magical Readathon. If you remember in my TBR video, I actually chose This Poison Heart by Kaylin Bayron, but someone kindly notified me that that is actually the first in a duology, I think. And they've just announced the cover for the second book, which is absolutely gorgeous, so I need to read This Poison Heart ASAP. So I chose to read this book instead because I know it's a standalone, and also it is super short, so it meant that I could squeeze it in right at the very end of the readathon. So this is a very famous book with a very famous film based on it called Shawshank Redemption, starring Morgan Freeman. I saw the film quite a few years ago now. Or was it last year? I don't know. Time. But yeah, I've seen the film in the past, so I sort of knew the story, and I was just interested to see the novelized version of it. And this is essentially the same as the film, or the film is the same as the book. There wasn't really anything in it that surprised me, and I remembered more of the film than I thought I did. But it's just a nice, short, sweet novella about a man who is falsely imprisoned, and it's just the story of sort of how he gets on in prison. If you don't know the story of Shawshank Redemption, I won't spoil it for you, but there is something that happens at the end that is very famous. Maybe the picture on the cover will give you a hint at what that is. I gave it 3 stars just because it wasn't anything spectacular. It wasn't the strongest Stephen King book that I've read for sure, but I haven't read that much Stephen King yet. But this was definitely not one of my favourites, but I still quite liked it. So in the month of September, my favourite book was of course Aurora Rising. I really was expecting it to be Empire of the Vampire, but this just took the top spot for me. I absolutely loved this. It is a new favourite series. It's just so exciting and so fun, and yeah, I just love the characters. My most disappointing book was Shawshank Redemption. It was good. It was hard to pick a disappointing book for September, but this was definitely probably the one that I didn't like as much as the others. And then finally, my most surprising book in September was Rainbow Grey. I was really apprehensive at this because it is a children's book, but it really surprised me and I really enjoyed it. So finally, moving on to October. In the month of October, I read a total of 7 books, and I was also participating, I said that really weird, in Spoopathon hosted by Spoops. So in October, I read 2,616 pages in total, which is thereabouts the same as what I read in September. I read a lot more shorter books in October to try and balance out some of the tomes, because lately I have been reading a lot of long books and they are very difficult to get through. So if we talk about star ratings, I had a really good month in October. I read 4 4-star books and 3 5-star books, which is incredible. So for genres, I read 1 fantasy book, which is like unheard of for me. I read 1 fantasy romance book, 2 sci-fi, and 3 horror, of course, because it was spooky month. And also this month I read 1 ebook and 6 physical books, so I tried to get a different variety of formats in there this month. So if you're interested, I was on the team Spoop Shifters for Spoopathon, and my personal points was 975, which I think was pretty good. But sadly, our team did not win. Our team came second, which was still really good. Rose team won, and I'm not bitter. I'm not bitter, but yeah, I'm very competitive, I think, so I was a bit like, rats! Just missed the mark, but never mind. It was good fun. I really enjoyed Spoopathon. Okay, so for the books that I read in October then. So the first book that I read was Malice by Heather Walter, and I read this for the prompt black cover, and also used it for the bonus prompts to read an LGBTQIA+ book, to read a spooky book, and to read a book that has been recommended to you. I rated Malice 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. This is a Sleepy Beauty? Yeah, she's Sleepy Beauty. This is a Sleeping Beauty retelling told from the perspective of the villain. So the villain the villain Alice is a sort of Maleficent type character. She is a dark fairy, but in this world they are called Vila, and so we have a bunch of like magical girls, I suppose, called the Graces. The Graces have powers, so you might have like the Grace of Beauty or the Grace of Wisdom, and Alice is a Vila, but she is the Grace, called the Dark Grace, so she has dark powers. She might do things like euthanize people, or she might put curses on people, and they all the Graces have like clients who come to them and ask them to do different things. So because Alice is a Vila, she is sort of very misunderstood, and this is essentially a villain origin story. It's very much the story of how Alice turns into the Maleficent equivalent of this world, and it was really exciting and I really liked it. And also it's got a sapphic relationship between Alice and Aurora, who is Princess Aurora obviously. And yeah, this is just a village and orange story, and because I'm someone who absolutely loves Maleficent as a character, I was very interested to see this sort of take on her, and yeah, it was really fun, and I'm excited to read the second ones. This is the first in a duology, so I'm excited to see the second book come out. I think it's next year. So the second book I read in October was Aurora Burning by Kristoff and Amie Kaufman. I of course rated this 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. So for the Spoopathon prompts, I used this for autumnal cover because of all the orange on it, and also I used it for the LGBTQIA+ bonus prompt because I think two of the main characters in this are LGBT. So yeah, this is obviously the second book in the Aurora cycle. I've already talked about the first book, so I'm not going to talk about this for too long, but I did really like this. This took a very strange turn, and there is so much drama at the end of it that I just need Aurora's end immediately. But yeah, I really liked this book, and I'm not going to say too much about it. I actually preferred the first book, I think, to this one. There was a lot more sort of action, fighting, spaceship battle scenes in this that I wasn't as into. What I liked about the first book is it has a heist, and that wasn't present in this book. This was very much more action based, but I still really liked it. And yeah, you're gonna hear me talk about Aurora's End in my next wrap-up video probably, so it's just been the Aurora cycle. So the third book I read in October was Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth. I used this for the prompts to read a book with 500+ pages, which this definitely does. It is a chonker. I also used it for the bonus prompts to read an LGBTQIA+ book, to read a spooky book, and also to read a book with your team colour on the cover. So the Spoop Shifter's colour is pink, so the text on this is pink. I rated this 4 stars. I was really excited about this book because I read The Miseducation of Cameron Post last year and absolutely loved it. So I was expecting good things from this. I really enjoy Emily Danforth's writing. She has this sort of writing style that feels like she's talking directly to you, which I really enjoyed. The plot of this is hard to explain because it's just a very strange book. It sort of gave me the same vibes as Bunny by Mona Awad, where it was just like a bit of a trip the whole time you were reading it. And I think that this does that vibe very well because this is a horror and it's a little bit psychological. So we're following 2 different storylines in this. The first is set in 1902 at a school called Brookhaunts, where 2 girls have been murdered. Well, no, they haven't been murdered. They've been killed by a swarm of wasps. And it's just sort of following the aftermath of that and the other sapphic women around them that are affected by their deaths. And then also you have the present day, which is following a film crew and 3 prominent heroines who are making a film about that original story of Brookhaunts. And at the centre of it all is this book called The Story of Mary MacLane, which is a real book. I think the whole concept is that book in this book is cursed. It's just sort of following a curse at the school and the curse of the book. The whole question of, is the school cursed itself? Is it haunted? Yeah, it just had very good creepy vibes. The only reason I gave it 4 stars is because it was such a slog, and there were points where I was like a little bit bored because it was so long and also very confused. But this is a really good book. I really liked it. What I like about it as well is that it's the way it's narrated. So there was actually a point where the narrator was like, you will find out who I am at some point, and I don't think we ever do find out who the narrator actually is. Or do we? And I've just completely missed the mark. I think I missed the mark. I think I've just realised who the narrator actually is. But yeah, so this book has footnotes. There are often times where the narrator is talking directly to you as the reader, which is emphasised by Emily Danforth's writing style. It's also partially illustrated, which I loved. So you've got full page illustrations like this, and then also every so often you would see like a little wasp drawn in the pages. So yeah, wasps feature a lot in this book. The sort of recurring theme of them was really creepy and quite terrifying at points. This had a lot of creepy scenes, gross scenes. It just was like the perfect spooky book, I think, for October. And I'm really interested to see what Emily Danforth writes next. So after reading the tome that is Plain Bad Heroines, I really just needed something refreshing. So I decided to pick up volume 3 of the Life is Strange comics by Emma Vieceli, Claudia Leonardi and Andrea Izzo. So I used this for the diverse rep prompt for Speedathon, obviously taking a diversion from my original TBR, and also this fulfilled the bonus prompt of an LGBTQIA+ book. So this is obviously volume 3, so it's hard to talk about what actually happens in this particular volume, but these comics are based on the game Life is Strange, which follows Chloe and Max. Max discovers she has time travel powers, and so this series is sort of set after the events of the game itself. But yeah, I really enjoy this comic series. Things are getting really interesting now, so I really just want to like pick up the next couple of volumes that are out. But I know that they're only up to volume 5 at the moment, so I don't want to read them too quickly because I need to wait for obviously the next one after that. Yeah, this just sort of talks more about the time travel aspects and Max figuring things out within herself. It was really good. I forgot to mention this, but I rated it 5 stars. I really liked it. So keeping with the short books theme, the next book that I read was The Sweetest Sacrifice by Elle. This is a very short fantasy romance novella that she wrote for Halloween spooky season. So I used this for the prompt After Dark, and I did escape the haunted house with this book, and it also fulfilled the bonus prompts to read a book that has LGBTQIA+ rep and also a spooky book. So I rated this book 4 stars. It was short and sweet, and it's a fantasy romance. There wasn't really much to it. It was very much just like a one-shot type story, and there's not much to say about it. It follows a girl who moves to a new town, and she is sacrificed to the devil, and so she and the devil make a deal where he will bring her back to life if she becomes his sex slave, and that's sort of just the gist of what happens in it. Yeah, it was nice. I liked it. 4 stars. So yeah, another short book that I read in October was The Mist by Stephen King. I decided to re-enter the house with this book. It was nearing the end of the month, so I thought I will try and squeeze in a few short books at the very end. So I used this for the prompt to read a book with less than 200 pages, and it also fulfilled the prompts to read a spooky book and also to read a book with the team colour on the cover. So yeah, I rated this book 4 stars. It was really good. I really liked this. I was actually quite surprised by it because I was so disappointed with Shawshank Redemption, but this is the perfect example of horror from Stephen King. So this follows a group of characters who are trapped in a supermarket following the creeping development of a mist in their town after a storm. The mist is so thick that you cannot see at all through it, and in the mist itself there are like creatures with like tentacles, and there was like giant spiders and things like that are like lurking about. So these people are trapped in this supermarket, and it's just sort of like a short story about them in the supermarket and trying to escape and get back to their families basically. But I really liked that this built up the tension so quickly, and it also had the tensions between the characters in the supermarket themselves. It was just sort of like a look into how people would cope in that kind of situation. This definitely reminded me of stories like Bird Box and A Quiet Place, where there is a like looming creature or thing that is out there that you're not necessarily, you can't see or you're not aware of, that you have to sort of avoid, if that made any sense. I could definitely see that this was the blueprint for those kinds of stories. This was very eerie and creepy, and it was a perfect Halloween read. So the final book that I read in October was Uzumaki by Junji Ito. So I used this for the prompt to read a book that has something you fear in it, and it also fulfilled the bonus prompts to read a spooky book and to read a book that has been recommended to you. This is a horror manga about a town that has been infected with spirals, and I was really confused about this at first because I'd heard it described as like a full story, and then someone else had described it as a series of short stories, and it is like a series of short stories all about this one particular town, and all the stories interconnect with each other. This was the perfect Junji Ito strange vibes book, and it is my favourite Junji Ito I've read so far. I rated it 5 stars. It started off very sort of small, where like one person was obsessed with spirals to the point where he wanted to become a spiral himself, and it just sort of gradually spirals into chaos where the entire town is basically one giant spiral. I was so creeped out by this book until it got to this one story where people started turning into snails, which if it were to actually happen would be freaky as fuck, but I just couldn't take the story seriously after that. I still really liked it and I loved seeing how things got crazier and crazier, but after the snail people I was just like, okay, you've lost me now. All the stories that were before the snail people were really creepy, and it was like kind of terrifying. Junji Ito has this really impactful art style. So yeah, this panel here kind of does the trick. He has this art style that is really sort of terrifying, and as someone who is scared mostly by seeing frightening images, it did frighten me a little bit. But yeah, I really liked this one. I kind of want to reread it already. I literally just could not put it down, and I read it in a space of 2 days, but I think if I had been given the chance to just sit and read it, I would have just sat and read the entire thing in one sitting. Yeah, I really love this one. I think I want to try and read Tomi next, which is also another long Junji Ito. It's a long book, but it's a very quick read. My favourite Junji Ito so far. So for my favourite book of the month was definitely a toss-up between Aurora Burning and Uzumaki. I'd probably say that they are tied for my favourite book of the month. They're very different stories and I enjoyed them for very different reasons. I would definitely say that these two were my favourite books this month. I don't really have a most disappointing book of October. I really enjoyed all of the books that I read for many different reasons. They were all very different stories this month. The one that I struggled with the most was probably Plain Bad Heroines, and because even though I still really enjoyed it, it's just a long book with a very complex writing style, so it was just a bit more difficult to get through. And then I would say my most surprising book was The Mist, just because I didn't enjoy the Shawshank Redemption that much, but I really enjoyed this one, so it's made me excited to pick up another Stephen King. So thank you so much for watching. That was my snuggly in bed wrap up for September and October. I haven't really got set reading plans for November. I'm very loosely participating in the Readathon hosted by Gavin, because I have a couple of middle grades that I would like to read. One of them is The School for Good and Evil by Simone Chinani, which I meant to read for Magical Readathon, so I would like to try and get to that this month. I also would like to try and finish the Song of Ice and Fire and also the Enemy series before the end of the year, so that's something I'm hoping to do over November and December. And I'm also making my way through Hour of Fire at the moment, kind of on the fence with this book, but I am vlogging my experience reading it, so you'll hear all of my full spoilery thoughts about this. But that is it from me today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm really sorry if it is really long and I've been going on for hours and hours and hours, but yeah, hopefully I will have the time to do more YouTube stuff because I do really miss it and I miss talking about books. So yeah, thank you again for watching for the third time. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you would like to see more from me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!